Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July edition of Poems That Changed Me. Well, at least this is the first installment of the July edition. July is the month of my birthday, and so for this month, I'm going to be talking about poems that were really important to my birth as a poet. And I hope that doesn't sound too self-important or too self-aggrandizing. But the idea behind this project is to highlight the transformative power of poetry. And so I thought it might be interesting to look at a few poems that were really important for my own transformation as a poet, poems that really shaped how I thought about poetry and were important for me as I sort of thought about a life of poetry. Some of these poems will be more well known than others. This is a poem that maybe not a lot of you know. It's by a poet named Stanley Plumly, who died a few years ago. A great poet, probably an underappreciated poet. And this is a poem by him called The Iron Lung. I've written about this poem. It appeared in the New Yorker, and this is it, The Iron Lung. So this is the dust that passes through porcelain. So this is the unwashed glass left over from supper. So this is the air in the attic in August. And this is the down on the breath of the sleeper. If we could fold our arms, but we can't. If we could cross our legs, but we can't. If we could put the mind to rest. But our fathers have set this task before us. My face moons in the mirror, weightless, without air, my head propped like a penny. I'm dressed in a shoe, ready to walk out of here. I'm wearing my father's body. I remember my mother standing in the doorway, trying to tell me something. The day is thick with the heat rising from the road. I am too far away. She looks like my sister. And I am dreaming of my mother in a doorway, telling my father to die or go away. It is the front door, and my drunken father falls to the porch on his knees like one of his children. It is precisely at this moment I realize I have polio and will never walk again. And I am in the road on my knees like my father, but as if I were growing into the ground. I can neither move nor rise. The neighborhood is gathering, and now my father is lifting me into the ambulance among the faces of my family. His face is a blur or a bruise, and he holds me as if I had just been born. When I wake, I am breathing out of all proportion to myself. My whole body is a lung. I am floating above a doorway or a grave. And I know I am in this breathing room as one who understands how breath is passed from father to son and back again. At night, when my father comes to talk, I tell him we have shared this body long enough. He nods like the speaker in a dream. He knows that I know we're only talking. Once there was a machine for breathing. It would embrace the body and make a kind of love. And when it was finished, it would rise like nothing at all above the earth to drift through the daylight silence. But at dark, in the deep summer, if you thought you heard something like your mother's voice calling you home, you could lie down where you were and listen to the dead. I still remember the first time I encountered this poem. My poetry professor as an undergraduate, William Virgil Davis, read this poem to us in our poetry workshop. And I felt like the iron lung myself, being sort of lifted out of the room into this unbelievable experience of language. I just remember not really knowing where the poem was going or where it was taking me. But I loved these subtle but crazy leaps that the poem is doing. It seems both autobiographical and not. Clearly, Plumly did not have polio. He's not growing into the ground. But many of his poems do enter into conversation with a difficult father. And so the otherworldliness of this poem, its fantastical elements with the weirdness of the iron lung, really did something to my undergraduate brain that I'm still trying to figure out. One of the reasons this poem was really interesting to me is its beginning. The use of the word so. So this is the dust that passes through porcelain. So this is the unwashed glass left over from supper. This repetitiveness and the so. And we don't really know what the this is, right? It's this sort of ambiguous this. And then the next stanza has this sort of if we could. So it begins in repetition, one kind of repetition. Then the quatrain goes to a different kind of repetition. But then the poem just stops there in terms of its repetitive structure. You think it's going to go one way, but it doesn't. It goes another. And it's sort of broken up by these asterisks that seem to be different segments of the poem. I was always really moved by this, and I write about this in the essay I'll send a link to, or post a link to, because I too have felt at times that I had worn my father's body long enough. I have the same name as him. We look exactly alike. I grew up in a small town where everyone knew him. And there is this sense of the son somehow needing, perhaps through poetry, to break away from the father. And I really resonated with this sentiment, or this sentiment really resonated with me, I should say. I also love the patience of this poem. I feel like that the poem takes its time getting where it's going, and it's a weird but beautiful combination of the literal, the autobiographical, the practical, the historical, and the fantastical, the magical, the otherworldly. It seems to have one foot in both worlds, and I love that uncertainty, that sense of not really knowing where the poem is taking us. This poem really changed so much for me, and I hope it is transformative for you as well.